Welcome, everybody. So this is the final CAR-PGA virtual panel session of the year. My name is Mike Tresca. I'm your host and also the committee chair. We are joined by the one and only Steve Jackson, which we're super excited to have today, and very excited to catch up with him, especially at the end of the year, which I think is a capstone on a lot of what we've been trying to do. Before we have a lot of questions for him. Before we ask those questions, I do want to just cover off on a few things very quickly. CAR-PGA YouTube channel continues to grow. We did some articles that were on NWorld and other places, so we're excited to see some more members. For those of you who are following us, welcome. We are trying to get to 100 subscribers. That is a long goal. I hope we will get there eventually, because that will allow us to shorten the URL for the YouTube channel. So we're not there yet. I think we're at 7 people. So we hope to get there further soon in probably 2022. And that's going to be one of my goals, is to get us to 100 subscribers. Also, we are going to be working on our annual report for 2022, summarizing 2021. I haven't even started on it. David and I have talked about it. We haven't gotten that far, but that is to come. So we will give you an update on that. Look for that. I actually, in my letter from the chair, I think didn't understand, because my brain was lost, that we were at the, that was the letter that wrapped up the year, kind of. There'll be one more, but it's going to be right at the end of the year. So we'll do a little bit of a wrap up as well as look forward into 2022. So with that sort of housekeeping out of the way, I am excited to introduce Steve Jackson of Steve Jackson Games and many things. I cannot do your bio justice, other than to say that, you know, you're responsible about 50% of my childhood, if not more, in terms of gaming. And we're very, very excited to have you here. So thank you for joining.
Oh, it's fun to be here. Ask good questions.
No pressure. No pressure at all. So,
no, none.
Steve, I think gaming's having a moment. That's my feeling, and my impression from sort of the world we're in, is that tabletop role-playing game is the intersection of sort of online gaming, imaginative play that I think people feel like they got away from, hang out with friends that they weren't able to do, frankly, going to another world when the world currently is not a great place, so people want to have imagination and sort of exercise it. What's your feelings on what you've seen from being at the beginning of this industry and sort of evolve? What have you seen that's changed, and what have you seen that compared to today versus when you started seeing, you know, games like GURPS or Munchkin launching? What's the state of things?
Well, the amazing thing is that role-playing is now part of popular culture. If somebody makes a reference to class or level, or just mentions D&D, most people under the age of 50 or 60 will get it. We won.
And it's funny you mentioned that, because CAR-PGA was originally founded by people before me, Paul Cardwell, who unfortunately passed away. It was really founded because we had a situation where people were attacking role-playing games, you know, baselessly, for all kinds of reasons. And it's so interesting, because one of the things we've tried to do to change to meet the times is, to your point, we've won, right? It's not about necessarily being defensive because people don't like role-playing games. Everybody, it's part of our culture now. So we're trying to pivot to really evolve to the new challenges. So to that point, I mean, are there challenges you see with role-play? Okay, so we won. Do we just all go home and then not worry about it? Or is there something else that we have to worry about in the role-playing space?
We could go home and play games. That's all a lot of us ever wanted.
It's true. It's true. And I've seen, you know, one of the things that certainly has changed sort of the way gaming's working is we've got more people from more walks of life. Certainly the gaming population is massive now, right? We've got just a lot more people playing. So I think that brings with it a lot more challenges. I don't know if you've seen that in terms of, for Steve Jackson Games, have you seen anything change with your customer base?
it grows slowly, and that's good.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm not sure that I would put the current situation as one of looking for. I mean, when you say a challenge, I don't think there's a new foe to find, but you could ask yourself, is there a way to do more good?
Right. And by that definition of do more good, are you talking about sort of in the context of gaming, or in context of players, or in the context of sort of the kinds of games we play, or what do you mean by
Maybe
good?
yes to all those. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. I think the guys at Penny Arcade with their Child's Play charity for children's hospitals have shown one way to do good. Just harness the power of gaming. There are probably intellectual ways to harness it as well.
And the CAR-PGA, many of my colleagues, not me, are teachers and in the mental health field, helping children. So to your point, I think role-playing games have proved to be very flexible in sort of doing good beyond just sort of playing, or seeing play as a way to help people from all walks of life do better, whatever it may be it develop skills or help them with their mental health or help prisoners who are in prison. There's all kinds of opportunities there. So I think there's definitely a huge opportunity to do good, to your point. So my favorite thing that Steve Jackson Games produces is the Stakeholder Report. Is that something we can talk about?
Sure.
Um,
The whole point of it is it's a public status report.
yes, and it's interesting because that takes guts. What was your impetus behind that? Was it just because you felt like, the public deserved to know? I know you talk about shareholders being everybody who buys games, but
Yeah.
how did that get started?
Transparency is good, and if you are being transparent to the world, you have to be honest with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that has killed or helped kill a lot of good game companies is, well, lying to themselves about how things were going.
Yep. I mean, that's good advice for life, honestly, not just gaming, but yes. Yeah. Yep. And it's, to me, Steve Jackson Games is a barometer that sort of guides the way, because what comes out, what Phil produces, sort of tells a story that I think very often we're like, yeah, we suspected that was happening, but it's a big deal for a company of your size and having been around to be that transparent. So I appreciate it.
We're not all that big, but we are old.
Yeah. Well, bigger than the individuals for sure, the individual producers, but that's great. How many people are in? It's actually in the report now.
Well, it changes from time to time, and we have actually added a few in the last year, so it's around 35 now.
That's fantastic.
Now,
So
that's counting a couple of full-time contractors and freelancers as though they were employees, because they're part of our workforce, even though legally they are not employees.
Yes, and you have to say that. You have to say legally they're not employees, depending on the state laws.
It depends on state laws. It depends on federal laws. And where it makes the difference is in their taxes. So we have to get it right.
That's right. Speaking of technical issues, my computer just fought with me. The high points, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. The high points I thought were telling. It looks like, one of the phrases you used was evergreens for the win. And basically the idea being that standbys do well in times of turbulent change. Was that something that you've always found to be true, or was that just in the time of a pandemic you found that, like, the stuff that people are familiar with worked best?
The pandemic really brought it home. People like familiar things, and if they're buying as a gift, they buy familiar things. Or if someone asks for a recommendation, they don't recommend the flavor of the month. They recommend something that they know their friend will like.
And that, you think that was driving sales in a lot of ways then, was some of that?
I can't think of any other explanation. We had a couple of fun little games that launched during the pandemic that just threw up their hands and were sucked under.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the same time, Munchkin just kept on selling.
Which is fantastic. And also I see Car Wars sort of made its return, which I think a triumphant return. So you're in the $1 Million Club is on Kickstarter, is that right?
Not quite, unless the $1 Million Club is total overall campaigns. Is that all campaigns or just one?
If you get $1 million, I still consider that a $1 Million Club. So if it's multiple campaigns, I think that counts.
But we have never done a single campaign that quite reached $1 million. We could have pushed Ogre that high, but we were already suffering from success, and we quit pushing.
Right. So what the suffering from success, I did hear some of this around Ogre. What is that? What's suffering from success? Volume? Is that the problem?
The volume put new kinds of strain on our whole operation. Just try bringing 40 containers in at once.
Right.
And we were reaching, in terms of profitability, we got caught up in our own campaign. We were trying to push it forward, and we would literally sit down and have meetings about what new stretch goals could we offer. Eventually, we wised up and quit that.
And I think that's, you learn that the hard way. One of the things, I work for N-World in one of my multiple hats. And one of the things Russ swears by is he, because he's got electronic products that are also print, he has it ready to go the day it finishes. And one of the things he avoids is stretch goals, ones you make on the fly. They're stretch goals, but they're not goals that you sort of make up. And the reason being for exactly what you're talking about, which is you can quickly become a victim of your own success when you start coming up with things, and then you're pushing yourself as well as sort of dangling to your backers some things that become increasingly challenged to meet. So I think that's good advice.
First things I bring up when people ask me, how do I do a Kickstarter? Well, here are some things not to do, and that's one of them.
So what other advice would you have for Kickstarters for those who want to do that?
Well, you mentioned a good one. Have as much ready as possible as you can. Now, the original philosophy of Kickstarter was based around people explaining a good idea, collecting money for it, and then they start work to produce it. That doesn't actually prove to be the best model in the world if you want to maximize the return to your supporters. Mm-hmm. You should have it well underway, even finished.
And it's interesting you say that, because I've heard people call it, it really should be kick finishers, not Kickstarters.
That's a good one. Well,
and I get it. I think that's what you just said, right?
It's against the original Kickstarter philosophy to use it as a sales tool. Mm-hmm. But the fact is, it's a good sales tool. And as William Gibson said, the street finds its own uses for things.
So Girl Genius did well. 2,915 backers, $172,000. Congratulations. And that just ended. That was what, today is the 2nd. So that was yesterday, December 1st.
No.
Oh, that was the update. Excuse me. That was the update. That wasn't the ending.
Yeah, right? There was an update that told people that, yes, it's actually printing.
That's great. And so is sort of, and I saw that in the report as well, is there a feeling that this is sort of, to your point about branding, this is the model? Mostly crowdfunding more than anything else, or is it sort of one of the bigger tools?
It's one of the bigger tools. It can't be the only tool. Mm-hmm. You certainly can't make Kickstarter your only tool if you're the size that we are. There are other crowdfunding platforms. None of them is as productive as Kickstarter for several reasons. That may change in the future, but it's just true now. And you shouldn't delude yourself that it's not true.
I've heard it. We've seen it too. We've seen, if you ask me, I couldn't name them off the top of my head, some of the competitors. They just don't get the same traction. It's not that they're not effective. It just seems like they don't get the name recognition and the branding engagement.
Indiegogo is probably number 2, but it's a distant number 2.
And I've purchased through Indiegogo, and it was fine, but it is different. The model I know is different. That's great. So, we mentioned how Steve Jackson Games is doing okay. I don't want to say too well, but doing well enough. The staff is doing well. What is your secret to sort of surviving during this with keeping your staff? And obviously with the Kickstarter piece, you mentioned don't overextend, which you learned. But
Well,
when everyone else is closing,
it would be a secret.
Okay, give us a hint then.
Oh, hints are all right. Well, listen to people. Don't fall into groupthink, but listen to other opinions, and try to be open-eyed about things. If an approach isn't succeeding, try something else. The other important thing, I was raised by parents who were depression kids. Don't throw things away. But I'm referring more to intellectual properties than I am to physical goods.
Like, say, the fantasy trip. Is that one
Say
example?
the fantasy trip.
Just using one as an example.
Just as a random example, yes.
Yeah.
But Car Wars too.
Oh yeah. But Car Wars, I feel like, has always been with us. I mean, Fantasy Trip obviously has been around too, but Car Wars for me was always a constant, even when we weren't playing it. So
It may have been a constant in your brain, but it wasn't available in the stores for a while.
Yeah. Yep.
You could get Car Wars material as PDFs,
right?
But it's not the same thing. And the game really needed to be brought forward in terms of its mechanics. I wouldn't call it cutting edge mechanics now, but I would call it good, solid mechanics based on what we knew in 2010 when we sent it to press.
That's great. And I do think the timing's right to bring it back.
It wasn't supposed to be cutting edge. I've only deliberately done cutting edge a few times, and that was kind of by accident as much as anything.
So Fantasy Trip, what precipitated that, right? Speaking of bringing things back, what made you decide to pull the trigger on Fantasy Trip?
Well, the rights had been sold to Metagaming, which went out of business.
Mm-hmm.
So the game was just lying fallow, but it was still the property of Metagaming. However, a law was passed, precipitated, I think, by comic creators and the situation some of them are in. Some of the people who created characters you love and spend a lot of money on don't see anything from their creations because they were done under ancient work for hire contracts and things like that with no royalties. At any rate, copyright law was changed, and it was possible, if you waited long enough and if you met various other requirements, to recover as the creator something that you had legitimately sold. And I watched the calendar, and when it was time to send that letter, I sent that letter.
And I guess the rest is history, right? In
Yes.
terms of, yeah.
Well, I hope it's not all history. We're doing more with the Fantasy Trip.
That's fantastic.
I've got a Kickstarter that hasn't launched yet but the preview page is up as of today for a project called Foes. We are getting into STL miniatures.
Wow. Oh, I have two 3D printers, so I love the
Okay,
STL
very
project.
good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you want these. They're very nicely sculpted and they're pre-supported for resin.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because I have next to me, I won't show you, an entire case of miniatures and terrain.
Mhm.
And I was one of those guys. I'm one of those game masters who needs everything. Like I have to have the exact thing, and I really want everything.
Yes, you want the prop so
Right.
you can see it.
The specific, like I have to have the right, so to me, it's I want to have the right pieces. And once I got a 3D printer, I stopped buying everything because I can mostly. There are some things that are small detailed I can't print. So how do you see 3D printing? Sort of obviously you're investing in it if you're talking about STLs. How do you see that affecting sort of the collectibles and miniatures industries?
Interesting, you should say collectibles.
Mhm.
A lot of things are going to become less accidentally collectible. I mean, there are things that are made to be collectibles, and then there are things that just become collectibles because of shortages or human perversity. And there won't be as many of the second kind once they can be made in your own workshop.
Right. And that's certainly my experience is that for twofold. One, I can make something if I need it and only when I need it. So if I keep the digital file, there's headspace that makes me feel comfortable that I'm collecting it still. And then the other is I don't print it until I know I need it. So it doesn't actually take up physical space, which I've run out of room, frankly. So it's really an interesting.
That last one is a biggie.
Mhm.
STLs can be sold so cheaply that if there's only one figure that you really want right now, you can still justify buying it. And you've then bought the whole set and you have them for later. I do not yet have my own 3D printer, but I've been buying STLs for a while because one day I will.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because in a lot of ways, and I know you've lived through this, it's a little bit like the PDF market. That's probably the closest, and maybe the MP3 market where we have sort of a physical media transition that has now switched to digital. And there are so many things that we may have taken for granted or didn't understand that change once it becomes a digital product, in terms of longevity and shelf space and a bunch of other things because it's now transition.
Right.
And
And it may be that in 5 years, there is no profitable niche, even for a medium-sized company, because they will be overwhelmed by the amount of free stuff. But it doesn't have to break that way. I noticed that Eric Clapton is still selling records.
right. It's definitely changed the model, but to your point, I don't think it means that the model's dead. But I do think so. In terms of the industry, how long do you think it is going to be? And maybe it's now before 3D printing severely changes the industry of miniatures and terrain.
Well, because you put the word severely in there, I'm going to say at least 2 years.
Okay.
It's changing now.
Yeah, for
but
sure.
It hasn't reached a tipping point yet.
Agreed.
You'll see the tipping point when one or more major producer of physical miniatures quits making physical miniatures.
Mm-hmm.
And either goes out of business, which would be bad, or transitions to an STL model.
Right. And it's clear to me if you're offering STLs, you think that time is nigh.
I would like to be ahead of the curve, but I mean, you asked about secrets, and it's a pretty obvious secret that you have to change with the times.
Right.
I mean, the wheel keeps turning, therefore you have to move if you want to stay anywhere near the top of the wheel. There have been 3 or 4 year periods when role playing was where it was the big deal. the collectible card games, non-collectible card games, whatever. It's great if you can anticipate or cause these changes, but it's more than adequate if you can see a change and go, oh, look, new playground, what can I do there?
And how was the transition to PDF? Was that, I worked with Warehouse. I was actually a writer for the magazine. I did some D20 pieces under Pyramid. So was that an easier transition, or like using that? Because that's probably the closest model I can think of.
It was a very frustrating transition, because that one I saw coming well in advance, and not to sugarcoat it, I was let down by just enough people at successive times that we lost any first mover advantage that we might have had.
Right.
Nobody can do it all by themselves.
Right. And now it's tremendously digital, right? I mean, that's one of the points.
It's very digital. There's a lot more GURPS material coming out digitally than in dead trees. But yes, I look at one bookshelf and so on, and I think, yeah, that could have been us, but didn't move fast enough.
Yeah.
And everything eventually gets back to the boss. So, there was my failure there, and not realizing that I was being fed optimism when progress wasn't being made.
Interesting.
These things happen. Didn't kill us.
Yeah. And not uncommon at all, but it is a challenge to be an early mover. And certainly the virtual tabletop space is a great sort of microcosm of that, where there's been so many competitors to Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds, and they keep dying off.
Yes, virtual tabletop is another place where the tipping point is some years away, and it keeps receding. I don't see any virtual tabletops out there that I really like. That doesn't mean it can't be done. It just means it hasn't been done yet. All these attempts are getting closer and closer.
What's your perspective on them sort of hitting that tipping point in near term?
More than 2 years.
Yeah, more than 2 years.
In Roll20 will continue to be successful, but whether their early mover advantage will hold up, or whether something else will overtake it, I don't know.
Right.
And then there are hardware solutions that may make the virtual tabletop obsolete before it even fully grows up. Technology changes in big ways as well as little ones. Like the last typewriter that I had, it's a Selectric 2, wonderful, wonderful typewriter. It was the absolute culmination of typewriter evolution. And that's because evolution stopped at that point. Nobody wanted typewriters anymore.
Yep. My favorite story is I used to temp and I would type. I would have to type as part of my job, but I had never typed on a typewriter before. I had actually, that's not true. I had used my grandmother's typewriter, which was a manual typewriter, and I used computers. So my finger stroke speed was completely different, and I had never worked with an electronic typewriter. So I had to take a
Smith Corona.
Yeah, it was quite the experience. So I had to take a test on the electric typewriter, and I was not used to, because it was one or the other. If it was a typewriter, it was really hitting the keys hard. If it was a computer, it was much lighter at touch. So I'm typing at this, and I think I was almost up to 120 words then, which I'm not now by any means. But I actually finished, and I walked and I sat there, and the typewriter was still catching up because it was an electronic, and there was a little bit of a delay.
It had a buffer.
And the person giving the test said, "You don't have to just hit the keys and pretend that you're typing," because it was that was the perfect collision of sort of the old and the new of sort of, I had grown up, and my kids now, they type, and they don't even blink that they know how to type. So it's such a fascinating, change in sort of the
Yes.
paradigm that people are growing up with.
I didn't learn until after my first year in college.
Right.
At that point, I had to know. 4 years later, I was making my living as a typesetter.
Right. Yep. So to that point, I mean, obviously you've seen the industry change quite a bit. What do you think's coming? We've talked about virtual, we've talked about STLs. What's the big thing that you think you see and it's probably in the 2-year horizon? It sounds like you've been talking 2 years. That's around the bend.
Wow, if only I knew.
Oh, you just don't want to tell me.
Maybe. As long as you believe I know, that's good enough, right?
That's true. Right. Absolutely. There's power in that for sure. But we touched
I
on
were a public company, I could do an Elon Musk on you.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we've talked about virtual, we've talked about STLs, certainly crowdfunding. I think those three are big. And to your point, we can see it in how Steve Jackson Games is where you're putting your product and your resources.
Something that I hope we see over the next couple of years is more swing toward domestic production of our games.
Mm-hmm.
We as an industry learned to offshore, and now there are big problems with it, and we need to learn to bring things back. And the US and Canada don't yet have the capacity to do some of the things we need to do because it was sucked away to China.
And that was that's the thing you listed under failure on the shareholder report. Was the stakeholder report was very specifically that it was scheduling and shipping, of which they're tightly integrated. It's interesting because I remember the Reaper Bones Kickstarters. One of the things that they proposed, and I'm not sure where this ended up because I haven't heard anything since, but was that they made enough money that they said they were actually going to open their own production facility stateside.
I don't know the details, but I understand they do have a production facility.
And boy, that's got to be paying dividends now, right?
I'm sure it is. At the same time, STLs may render some of that moot, but it will already have paid for itself.
Right.
They are smart people at Reaper.
Absolutely. So is that something you see that small companies would invest in, or would it be maybe a collaborative where maybe groups get together and sort of share a facility? Or how do we to your point, it's almost like, where do you start after so much of the infrastructure is offshore? How do you start bringing it back?
That's a very good question. I can certainly imagine game companies working together, but I mean, paper game companies are eclipsed by digital game companies. Digital game companies mostly don't need boxes, but for instance, cardboard boxes are one of the things that is difficult to get at a reasonable price onshore right now. And lots of people need boxes. There must be a lot of printing plants looking at that now and scratching their heads. And I don't think that any thoughts that I have are likely to be knowledgeable enough to help. Dice, on the other hand, if we all pooled our brains and figured out a way to bring dice production onshore, because the way dice are done right now is very hand labor intensive. You can't pay dice making staff $20 an hour and stay in business. Not the way dice are made in China.
Right. one of the things we had John Peterson on last time, and he had just released his history of the game wizards and the history of TSR. And one of the things that came up was how TSR, in addition to some of the things they probably, got into that maybe didn't make sense to everybody looking outside looking in. But one of the things was being a dice, having control over the manufacturing of dice and having the control over manufacturing of miniatures back then. So it's always been a challenge, it sounds like, and certainly now it's even more so. But to your point, it's a little bit of a hobby as people are making their own dice. I know that there's been lots of Kickstarters, but at scale, it's going to have to change.
But
right.
it doesn't scale up nicely.
Right. Interesting.
They're beautiful. They're the most beautiful dice.
I'm a Amazon reviewer, so I'm on Amazon's list of products that I get in return for reviews. And within the past year, I have reviewed 47 sets of dice. 47. And it is because something changed in China. They're not locally made, but they become, I think dice are showing up in dollar stores now. I don't know that they're good dice. I don't mean they're good dice, but they're dice. And
they're okay dice.
Yeah. But good enough.
If you look at it as a semi-object of worship, if you're a collector, they're not special.
Right.
If you want to roll a random number, they're fine.
Good enough, right? I mean, if we used to crayon the numbers in, they've got to be at least as good as those. So
they're better than those.
Yeah, that's right. But it seemed to me like something has changed, because it's a wealth of product in a way that we've never had before. So, but again, distribution, I think, is one of the things, and like that's the one big one that Steve Jackson Games mentioned, which was we took it for granted where we got all the stuff from, and now it's starting to, those chickens are coming home to roost a little bit.
Yes.
So you're okay though in terms of your shipping? Is that sort of an ongoing struggle, or
we are in no sense okay? It is an ongoing struggle. Container prices have come down some in the past couple of months. But Phil Reed, our CEO, spends an awful lot of his time on logistics.
I believe it. And is it because of just trying to manage the challenges, or is it trying to find, I guess maybe there's not even alternates, right? It's sort of just least worst choice when it comes to shipping and logistics.
There have been times when we have looked at putting things on airplanes rather than bringing them on the boat. Sometimes he finds himself asking what port to bring them in on. Is it better to give them a shorter boat ride and then a long truck ride? But of course, truck drivers are becoming kind of scarce right now.
Yeah, there's labor shortages too, which is significant. Yeah, the CEO of Beanie Baby, Ty, I guess, apparently decided to just ship everything by plane. I have this image of one person on a plane with like Beanie Babies in all the seats, but I'm sure that's not how it went. Probably, and to your point, basically saying I'd rather do that and at least get it here and maybe take the hit up front than just roll the dice and I hope one of my cargo containers gets picked up tomorrow.
Especially if you've got a seasonal product. If you have orders from Walmart for 1 million billion Beanie Babies, but only if they come in by December 1st.
Right.
You put them on a plane.
What's your holiday, speaking to that point, what's your holiday season equivalent? Is it around this time? Do you have a spike where there's a holiday where people tend to game more? Is it the winter?
Are you talking about a sales season or a play and feedback season?
Sales season specifically.
Sales season. It started about a month ago, and it'll continue until people go back to work in 2022, when it will just fall off the deep end.
Right. So that's about right. Now, that's what I've seen.
People, after only 2 years of pandemic, only 2 years. It's hard to generalize, but people who work at home are saving a lot of commuting time, and I think some of that goes into playing games.
Totally. I pushed this idea, and I guess it didn't go over well, that people play gaming on Thanksgiving. I guess it depends on your family relationships, but I do imagine starting where it gets colder and people are getting together is an opportunity, and then from there on and right through the holiday season when they're hopefully working less, I hope. Seems like it's an opportunity for role-playing games to have their moment.
Well, yes, it depends entirely on who your Thanksgiving circle is.
Right. Friendsgiving, family members who are maybe gaming curious, but then it goes down from there.
I never heard the term Friendsgiving until a couple of months ago, and now it's part of the lexicon.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I get it. I get why people have it. Not everybody is super excited to see their family, so I do understand, but I thought it was interesting because that is a way I could see. Maybe your family members don't want to play, but if you're getting together with friends, sure, I could see people game then, for sure. Definitely.
Your family members probably want to talk about family.
Yep.
You know, it's like my family, they want to visit and catch up.
Right.
And that's catch up with themselves, not catch up with Flatagar the Ranger.
Right. I don't know. That's how I'd like to catch up, but that's just me.
How is old Flotty doing these days? Killed another owlbear, eh?
Talk about your character. Who needs an excuse? We should have a whole holiday just dedicated to that. I would do that. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, there's a project for you.
I'll work on it.
Talk about your character day.
I love it. I like if you can eat and drink and talk about your character, I'd probably be good for at least a month. I think that's probably called gaming.
I'll talk about your character month.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Even talking like a pirate is only fun for about a day.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And not everybody appreciates it. I do that at work and it gets very confusing. So it depends on who you work with.
That's my favorite part of it.
So I think it's wonderful to see that I think, frankly, to your point, Steve Jackson Games does things right. Maybe you have challenges, but that's okay. And I think the challenges you're certainly experiencing are challenges everyone's experiencing. So not alone, but I'm super excited to see how that the company's thriving.
Oh, that's kind of you to say that. Yeah. If we had a simple mantra like "Don't be evil," it would probably be something like "Don't be lame." I think the people who buy games can tell the difference between a group that really wants to do the best they can and a group that's phoning it in and looking at the quarterly bottom line.
Totally. And the industry, I think, is sensitive enough that you can tell. And of course, to your point, one of the phrases I do in my day job is transparency and authenticity. I think fortunately I say it enough, people don't believe me anymore. And because I'm in marketing, by nature, they assume I'm lying, right? So that's
right,
part of it.
You trained for years to be this natural.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it's refreshing to hear because I think it absolutely is true. And as I said, the stakeholder report to me is emblematic, and not the only thing, but emblematic of, I think, a company philosophy that is really great.
We try, and some other companies have started doing reports.
Good.
I could, but will not name one that does what's marketed as a report, but is just all marketing spam. But there are some honest ones out there too.
Okay, I won't ask, but that's okay. I appreciate you calling them out. That's fine. That's fine. Anything else so I'm going to open it up to questions to the group.
Cool.
But is there anything you wanted to share that I didn't cover, or anything you wanted to mention, Steve?
I plugged the upcoming Kickstarter, and if I'd come in with an agenda, that would have been it, was to tell people, ha, my miniatures are coming.
Excellent. And did you mention specifically what miniatures, or I don't know if you can share, like what's the
sure
theme?
There will be about 40 if it hits all the stretch goals. 2 clans of orcs, a group of skeletons, and a group of octopus.
One of these things is not like the other, but okay. So octopi, is that what I heard?
Yeah, the octopi are a mainly NPC but playable race in Fantasy
In the
Trip.
fantasy trip, yeah, that's what I was guessing. That's great. So it's for fantasy trip essentially. I'm sure you can use it for anything, but
I hope that people will look at them as cool minis they can use.
right.
But that's where the concept of octopi waving swords came from.
I love it. And it's interesting too, because one of the things, certainly with me having printed for a few years now, is once you disassociate the miniature from a thing, because the STLs aren't, they don't live in space where they have to be branded with a thing. Their size can be modified. You can, depending on how proficient you are, you can even adjust what they're holding or whatever. And it very quickly turns into, they can be used for anything. So to your point, the possibilities are endless just because one game uses it, which is great. STLs could be used in anything and could be smaller scale, bigger scale, whatever you want.
They just have to start out as good sculptures, and I think these are.
100%. Well, so when is that launching?
I can't remember what it's called. There's a pre-page up now. It's just a single page that lets you get on a mailing list to be notified when the real campaign starts.
Right.
And the real campaign will probably start December 13th.
Wow, excellent. And when does it conclude? Does it go through the end of the year, or?
It goes through the end of the year. That just seemed like a nice arbitrary place to draw the line.
Excellent.
And it will fulfill as soon after that as we possibly can.
Well, and it's STL, so hopefully it'll be
there will be some available add-ons that are physical products.
Excellent. Oh, I'm looking forward to this.
Just throw that big switch that's marked fulfill,
right,
and that would be it.
Fantastic. Well, and still, to your point, at least you get something immediately or quickly, and then the rest comes. So that's fantastic. I'm excited. What's it? Is there a name for it yet?
Foes.
Foe. Oh, just foes. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So foes.
We will look for that. Fantastic. All right, so I will open it up. I think we, it's not too. Let's see how many. We have 9 participants, so we can do voice if you want, or if you want to chat. Go ahead. Anyone?
I'm good with whatever.
Steve's fearless. I have no doubt he can handle. Any questions, Sage? I think you had one. Give it a moment. So, Steve, do you take vacation?
What is that?
I didn't think so.
Sage is muted. He may not know he's muted.
Oh, I can ask to unmute. Sage, did you have a question? Because I saw there was a policy on questions.
He's got the little slash through his microphone.
Oh, I see. So Sage just said they don't have a question right now. Okay, any other questions for Steve?
Sure, I've got one.
Okay, great. Is that Ted?
Yep.
Go ahead, Ted.
So many years ago, I bought quite a bit of the old Cardboard Heroes line, and I haven't really paid attention to whether anything's been done with that recently. But have you been publishing any of that recently, or are you going to be publishing any more in the future?
We keep the Cardboard Heroes available as PDFs. We haven't done any more physical ones, basically because we thought we had pretty well covered the waterfront on what people could use. And I guess there is no land. I should just put a period at the end of that sentence.
Okay.
Good question. I'm pretty sure I've seen or used some of that content before, which is fantastic. Again, partially because Steve Jackson Games did it before anybody. I remember cardboard miniatures being sort of revolutionary when everybody had print. So
yeah, that was a new idea. It's accepted now, but it was a new idea in the world. People
Other questions?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Yes.
Okay.
Hold on, let me undo the video here. Hold on a sec. I used to play a lot of Fancy Trip way back in the day, and I haven't dived into the new one yet. How would you summarize
Minimal.
So,
The new edition is tagged the Legacy Edition. I did not try to get in and rework the game. I tried to keep all of the important things the same, correct errata, add a little bit more material, but it's still the game that you knew.
all right, well, thank you.
Thank you for that question. Other questions for Steve? David, I see you.
Hi.
I see your,
I
I
have
can
one.
actually see you raising your hand. Go ahead, Dave.
Real hand. I have a question, Steve.
Yes.
And I brought this up with you a long time ago, but the GURPS supplements for historical and literary settings, I know anecdotally have been used by lots of teachers in other educational contexts. You know, they're a fantastic collection of information for anyone wanting to run a game in such a place and time. But if you're aware of any more recent applications of those those sorts of publications that their company has, I'd love to hear about them.
Well, I hear about these things from time to time, but I don't keep a list. I'm sorry.
Mhm.
Obviously, that would do you a lot of good right now. But I don't just have a file that I can shoot over. Teachers are still discovering them and using from them,
Mhm.
not just playing games from them, but occasionally using them as part of the curriculum. And I always give the warning, we try not to make a misstatement without pointing it out, but the emphasis is gamified. They're game books. They talk about things that are likely to be interesting and productive for referees and players, and they hand wave or completely omit things that a historian would know and care about if they don't advance the game. So I would never try to teach a history course just with one of the Who's Who books, for instance.
Sure. Thank you.
To that point, Steve, I absolutely use the books as references. Maybe I'm not allowed to, but I do. GURPS is sort of the go-to sort of industry standard for succinct historical or genre summaries. I mean, was that a philosophy, or how did you get to that point? I'm not sure if it was something you'd always planned, but it certainly worked out that way, that they're sort of known throughout the industry that that's the book. Doesn't matter what game you play, you go there just to get introduced.
It wasn't part of the original plan, but when some of the early ones were accepted that way, we said, oh, that's a good thing. And this is a very old statistic now, so I know no longer. At one time when we polled our buyers with a bounce back card that was packaged with shrink wrap books, we found that at most 40% were playing the game, 30%, give or take, were using it for some other game, and 30% weren't gaming at all. Some of them wanted to, but for whatever reason, they didn't have a gaming group, but they were just reading them for enjoyment.
Totally. And I think that's probably true of many games, but I could see that absolutely being the case. And certainly they're a joy to read. I've learned a lot about Russia. I learned a lot about time travel. I learned a lot about Mars, all thanks to GURPS. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's something that I emphasize to adventure writers as well, is that some of their buyers will never be able to run this adventure or even play in it. But it still needs to be an interesting story. It's just told in a different form.
Totally. And then to your point, the book I wrote on gaming compared sort of what I consider the spectrum of media engagement, right? So there's sort of imagination where you're just reading a novel. There's passive where you're watching TV. There's video games, but then there's the imagination of role playing. And to your point, it's a spectrum. It's not just a one or the other. You don't just only use your imagination or you just read a book. It can be multiple things, I think, and role-playing games absolutely fit in that space of some people just enjoy just imagining what their characters. And of course, I know because I had a buddy, that's what he did, is he just made characters all day. Just GURP to his heart's content.
It's a creative process. And from that, he might grow to writing.
That's right.
These characters have to do something after all.
They live one way or the other. We just, whether we let them out, I think.
Yeah.
Sylvia, did you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. Which one of the GURPS books do you enjoy the most?
What's a good one?
Oh, that's like asking which one of my children I like the most. And the answer is it really depends on the day. I am very fond of the time travel book because I co-authored that with John M. Ford, who was brilliant, and it gave an opportunity to homage some writers that did amazing work, like H. Bean Piper. But I'm also, I tend to be the most focused on whatever I've worked on most recently. So right now it would be Girl Genius. There are a lot of them out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That would have been my pick too. Other questions?
Sure. So do you still play RPGs? And if yes, what are you playing now?
I don't get to play very much. Most of it's in my head as I write or edit fantasy trip material. When I do play, it's fantasy trip.
Makes sense.
What with the pandemic, I think the last board game that I played outside of my own house was Terraforming Mars at a convention a couple of years ago. It was really cramped our style.
Any other questions for Steve as we wrap up? I want to be sensitive to your time, Steve. I appreciate you taking it.
Well, thank you. It's only 7 now. I'm good at the moment. So if there are other questions, let's get them.
I have one, if I may.
Go ahead.
My name is Elizabeth Haig. Seems like a lot of you know each other. You certainly don't know me. I'd like to ask you about overcoming barriers to entry. You've been talking about gaming curious people and gaming becoming more mainstream, and that has some implications. First of all, prizes and probably tabletop games, especially like ones that involve boxes. And there are hopefully a bunch of people who felt excluded, like during the rise of gaming, when a lot of people were getting really comfortable with the rules and the processes and just how to think about things, that might now be feeling more welcome and becoming interested. But there are some complex processes involved. And I was wondering if you had any, in terms of dealing with mechanics and finding groups and just all kinds of things, there are some barriers there. So
Well,
I'd love to hear your thoughts.
To cut to the chase, when role-playing started, it was a white male pursuit. And those of us who survive from that first generation are now old white males. Period. I mean, that's there is no way to go back and make the original gangsters a more representative group because we weren't. That has changed a lot over 40 years, but there are still some exclusionary voices out there. It gives me great pleasure when I see them shouted down, and I may have helped a little bit in that myself from time to time, but I try and there are different philosophies on this, but I don't want to be a jerk even to jerks. But if I'm at a table where somebody isn't welcoming, I'm going to call them out on it. You mentioned price as a barrier to entry. I don't see that as a biggie because there is so much free stuff available, and because if you can find a welcoming group, they'll have material. You don't have to spend a dime of your own until you're ready. As far as creating material that won't be exclusionary, the art makes a big difference. You're no longer seeing illustrations that are all white male heroes, except for the white female heroes with appurtenances bigger than their heads. That's over, except in deliberate parody. You see more inclusive illustrations. So no longer, does someone who is not an old white male look in vain for their own picture among the adventurers. Did you raise any categories that I skipped?
Well, I was thinking less about categories of people than about learning to play and finding.
Right, I was talking about categories of inclusiveness.
Mm-hmm. No, I don't think I raised any particular categories.
Okay, but as far as learning to play, schools are awesome if you're in school. And if you're not in school, nothing else is that awesome. There are gaming taverns. That's an interesting trend that is developing, and some of them seem to be successful. But I have never tried to walk into one and get a pickup game, so I don't know how well that works. It still really helps to have friends who want to game.
I'll be right over, Steve. When are we gaming?
Yeah, I am set for a couple of conventions next year.
I'm sure.
I miss
Are you going to
those.
conventions? That's nice.
I'm scheduled for one in March. We'll see what the situation is like that.
Do you go to
I
Gen
mean,
Con?
I was very briefly at the last Gen Con. I hope to be at the next one. If people will just get their vaccinations, we could get this maybe more under control. That's another thing we have to look at with open eyes. It's a plague, and it's not going to go away by itself.
So you were at this year's Gen Con then?
Yes.
How was it in terms of protocols and safety?
Mostly people were being good. There were exceptions. Yeah, I don't really have anything more brilliant to say than that.
Well, what I had heard was sort of the inside the convention was good. And as soon as you went outside, which by the way, the rest of the world you have to engage in, hotel, whatever, it wasn't as good as what I had heard. But
that's fair.
Yeah. Yep.
There
That's
were
what I heard.
certainly a lot of people yanking off their masks as soon as they got into the open air.
Yeah.
But the open air right outside the convention hall was still full of people, and that wasn't wise of them.
Yeah, it's a lot of people.
But I did not hear of any great post-Gen Con infection rate increases.
Thank
so
God.
we seem to have dodged the super spreader bullet.
Well, here's hoping. I would love to go to Gen Con. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah,
And I know I'm not alone, unfortunately. So
I
hopefully.
was only there for about 24 hours. And I was there for one specific meeting. And if not for that, I never would have gotten on the plane.
Right.
And since I was there anyway, I put on my mask and walked the floor and said hello to people, but you have to say hello like that.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
Not
And
just
yet,
no hugs, but no hugs, damn it.
yeah, I know. It's hard. I run my Boy Scout troop. I'm Scoutmaster for my troop, and it's challenging with boys in a enclosed room who want to play games, and it's just challenging. So, and I always think
busy. Do you sleep?
Who, me?
You.
Nope, I take naps though.
Ah,
That's the secret to that. Any other questions for Steve? You've been a pleasure, Steve. Can you just come to every one of our sessions? That would be great if you could just.
no.
No.
But thank you for asking.
It's a good answer. It was a good. I figured I'd try it, but no, I totally understand. Okay, so I think we'll wrap up. What I'll do, Steve, is I'll put a letter together that covers anything. I will email you just to make sure I get all your links. But if there's links you want to put in there, or there's something I missed, we'll actually reconnect and make sure we amplify that. I will edit this video because I'm getting better at it to sort of do the transitions and everything. So, and we'll put it on YouTube. But I just want to thank you so much, both for all your contributions and everything you've done. I've personally benefited from as a gamer, and also just for being so generous with your time.
Well, I appreciate what you people are doing, and it's got to be some of your doing that we won.
That's what I'm going to title this. We won, and just leave it at that.
Good one.